Today we speak with Randall Lipps, founder, chairman, president, and CEO of Omnicell, a global leader in medication management and pharmacy automation. Omnicell provides robotics, intelligent software, and data-driven services that help hospitals and pharmacies reduce errors, improve efficiency, and advance toward the vision of the autonomous pharmacy. Randall founded Omnicell in 1992 after experiencing firsthand the inefficiencies of supply management during his daughter's hospitalization. Drawing on his background in airline operations and logistics, he set out to build solutions that would make it easier for caregivers to get the right medications to patients. Today, Omnicell technology is used in more than 5,000 hospitals and 40,000 pharmacies worldwide, supporting progress toward the industry's vision of the autonomous pharmacy. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. I am the managing partner of GrowthCap and executive chairman of Market Insight Media. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click the follow. Randall, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you.
It's a privilege. Thanks for having me.
So one of the things I like to start out with for the benefit of our audience is to explain some background on your company. Obviously, you're in the health tech space, you're in the pharmacy space, you touch a lot of hospitals, pharmacies, tens of thousands of pharmacies. Tell us about the solutions that you provide.
Yeah, well, if you just think about healthcare, almost anytime we interact in a healthcare event, there's always medication involved, right? Either we're going to the pharmacy or we're in a hospital or maybe we're getting surgery. There's always medication involved in that. And that's where we focus on that medication management, both the logistics of getting the medication there and then the actual point of what we call administration. So how do you make sure that that works perfectly or is near perfection every time? And today, we have a lot of problems with that. And so automation and technology is closing the gap on many of these problems. And that's our mission. How do we make medication work so that the outcomes you want from healthcare, the outcomes you want from taking the right meds, all make you healthier, cure your diseases?
And today you're a big company, but you started this, decades ago with a single product, as I understand. Can you take us back to why you started the company and that first product?
Well, I actually came out of the airline industry. I was an industrial engineer where you're trying to figure out how to make things faster, move faster. This was out of the early 90s when airlines were getting rid of the paper. They were competing heavily, so costs were really important. Back in 91, I think it was, my daughter was in the NICU. And I was just shocked. I was at one of the best hospitals in the world, still is, UCSF. And as she was there, they created a ream of paper every day. And I just thought, wow, that's incredible. There's an arbitrage there for moving some paper to electrons somewhere. So some Stanford and I got together and we just looked at a bunch of ideas. And frankly, the first 4 or 5 ideas didn't work because we just thought, well, you can just take standard industry stuff and move it over to healthcare and solve all these problems. But healthcare is a unique adaptation of technology. And so you've got to find that secret sauce that works. And so eventually we came up with a good process to get meds and medical supplies to the patients without as much fanfare. Instead of every nurse, what I noticed when I was in that bedside with my daughter was that every nurse, because I got to know him, I was sitting there for 3 weeks. She's fine, by the way. I always forgot to throw that in there. She's now 30 and has 2 kids and is doing great. Was that every nurse that came in had their own little stash of supplies, vacuum tubes and things that my daughter needed to be maintained on. And a nurse would say, oh, I got to go get an XYZ. And I said, well, Susie has hers over there. Oh, really? Let me go get those. I said, why don't you have just one place for stuff? And so I just said, how do we make that more efficient? So nurses particularly could be happy and the people supporting those nurses could also be happy.
And every company has a different journey. Some out of the gates, they reach product market fit and they begin scaling. Others, they have to experiment quite a bit before things take off. There's a little bit of maybe a plateau and then acceleration. How did it go for Omnicell in those early days?
Well, let me just say we've had a lot of ups and downs, but the first 5 years I can still quote from memory: 50,000, 2 million, 4 million, 11 million, 24, and 48. And that was a 5 year run there. And so it was a lot of fast growth, particular for medical equipment. And you want healthcare to be a conservative industry, so to speak. In other words, they want to be careful before they introduce new processes, new systems into their flow because it has to do with the health of patients. And so that was pretty fast. And then, we had some plateaus and then we'd have the next rush and the next evolution. So I guess we're almost 30 years now. There's been a lot of ups and downs, but, healthcare's problems, there's a lot of them, but figuring out which ones to solve and understanding not just how the technology is going to work, but how is it going to be adopted, right?
Hmm.
The biggest problem is not finding technological solutions to solve a lot of problems, but getting the adoption into healthcare is very critical because there's a lot of constituents, not just the users, but who's responsible for the system. How does it integrate with other systems? On and on and on. So solving the right integration and adoption story and process is key to winning in the healthcare IT market for sure.
And how do you approach innovation? Is it a continual process, or do you kind of set the strategy, say, the beginning of the year and you run with that, or you set the strategy every so often?
Yeah, it used to be more often, and then we'd kind of have a cycle. But now, what's really changed in the last 3, 4 years is the speed of technological change. The cost of technology has got cheaper, right? Robots, even the cost of programming with AI is getting cheaper. So we established a innovation center. And what's really cool about that is it runs what's called innovation sprints. And so they go for 15 weeks. We get a lot of ideas. We have probably over 150 ideas. We have to call those down to about 30 per year. And we try to run 30 sprints a year. We also have hackathons inside our own company. In fact, one of the sprints that's turning out to be a great market win for us was one of our hackathon, the winner of the hackathon series we just last did. And so you put them through these 15-week sprints, you bring in customers, you build prototypes, you write software so that it just works enough to understand how it works. Then you try to install it, and a couple of customers will go around and see them, maybe as many as 5 to 10. And customers are much more open to new technology, I think, than they were probably 10 years ago because they know there can be a better way. And so at the end of that 15 weeks, you say, is this go or no go? And a lot of them look good, sound good, look great in the drawing room, go to the customer. And so only about 10%, 15% of them actually pass. If they pass the innovation sprint, then they go into the product roadmap. And so we've done, I think, this last 12 months, we have 3, 4 sprints that were successful, and those are in our product roadmap. And those things, we weren't as disciplined about looking at every idea. We were sort of just kind of branched slowly off the system platform to something else. Now we're targeting better, and it's a lot of excitement, right? Because people want to have an impact. And so how do you release people to have an impact? You set up a process that lets them vet their ideas appropriately. And even if their product doesn't make it to the market, they feel good about being able to vet it, right?
Hmm. Now, you've been at the helm of the company for over 3 decades. It's not very often that we find that these days.
Yeah.
What has kept you there?
Well, one, I have a passion for the market and I wake up every day. How can we make healthcare? We've got a long way to go. In fact, I have this vision. I started the Industry Institute on the autonomous pharmacy. And that autonomous pharmacy is to help these pharmacists out. About 75% of their work is administrative. Only 25% is what we would call clinical. So we want to get pharmacists out of the hospital basement, out from behind the counter of the retail store, and get them engaged with patients and physicians to get the ultimate outcome, right? And you're not doing that if you're filling out paperwork. So the autonomous pharmacy is behind the scenes, if you will, doing all the work for you. And so we were on about a 5 year roadmap to get there. And it's just exciting because I think we always were inching toward better solutions and so forth. But now with the advancement of robotics, the advancement of AI, the light is at the end of the tunnel there. And I don't know how to explain it other than it's like moving from horse and buggy to a car or moving from the first commercial air flights. This is going to revolutionize pharmacy so that people don't have to worry about, is the drug going to be there? Do I have the right drug? Is this the right one for this disease or this person? It's always right. It's always the best thing. And we can monitor to make sure it's getting the results we want. So the practice is too broad today, right? It needs to be more precise. And, with genetics and the like, drugs will be very specific. But in that sense, we need to be precision with the execution of the pharmacy. And then we'll all win. The cost will go down, health will increase, and people will just get healed about it. You think about it. Think about when you go into a hospital or something, maybe you're probably on drugs when you get there. You get some procedure and you're on a lot more drugs when you're in the hospital. And then they're just waiting, really, till you're healthy enough to go home so that you can be on drugs that can continue to keep the healing process. So medication is in the center of the body's natural healing process. And we just got to make sure those things are right and doing the things we need to do. And we'll all become healthier.
Reflecting on your ability to build a company over time and have an organization with many, many people, and you have, key executives in place, what have you learned about leadership and culture and people management?
Well, I've learned a lot, some of it the hard way, but the key is you got to be willing to say you're in a learning mode, kind of have to reinvent you and your team's approach every 3 years. What got you here is probably not going to get you the next place. And you have got to embrace feedback. You got to be willing to give it. You got to be willing to take it. And you got to believe that's part of your job. Because the way I thought and the things I did 30 years ago are a lot different. They're a lot different, not because I've all just read a bunch of books and I have and done a lot of things, but because I've tried to always surround myself with people who would be honest and true and give me the feedback that I need. And so I think if you want to be a leader and be in place for a long time, if you're open to feedback and really listening to the feedback, you can develop yourself. And because the skill sets you need to start a company for the first $100 million are a lot different than the skills you need to go from $1 billion to $2 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And so understanding that I have to retool myself or be able to listen to doing different approaches than we did before are critical to us making those moves as a company and me as a leader. So being coachable is not an option if you want to be a long-term leader. Now, a lot of companies hire people for the moment that do the first 5 years really well, and they execute the 5-year plan that made them successful at the last company, and they do that, and that's great. And then they hire the next person to do 6 through 10. And I think because the industry in healthcare is a little bit slower than high tech or consumer industry, it's really allowed me to leverage myself into the industry, get to know a lot of people, and be involved in a lot of organizations where being present and having a history is really an advantage to us and our company.
We talked about innovation. Curious how AI is playing into that or how you're currently leveraging AI.
Yeah, AI on several levels. We really got high mark for our engineers. We want them to at least be doing 30% of the code. We want to see some high production, maybe some as high as 50% of their code being written by their AI cohort. And we feel like we're well on that trail. And we're really feeling like, gee, we can get 30% more out of our team by using AI. So that's a key productivity tool. I think there's some other things that we do with AI that are kind of the real helpful in customer service or value in large disparate pieces of data that we can do. But it's interesting as I've thought more about AI, our goal is to make sure we have the infrastructure in place, cyber secure, your data is protected. It can't be spiked by some improper data. so that the AI applications can come and run on it, both ours and other people. See, I don't think the AI questions that you may want to present to a set of data is that hard to come up with. I could come up with it, our customers could come up with it. But the question is, where are the data that is going to feed into that to give you the right result?
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to say we have the strongest and secure and reliable set of data is key in that AI equation. And then secondly, when we talk about the autonomous pharmacy, that's the ultimate AI application, right? I mean, we already have that vision. And so eventually everything will be driven, this autonomous pharmacy will be driven by AI. A good way to think about it is there's some vectors, let's say safety. We always think about safety in using medications. And there's 1,000 things about every drug that you need to look at when you're talking about safety. So you create a safety AI engine pillar in your data set that is checking all the different points to make sure you're achieving safety. Then you think about cost. Then you have an AI agent that represents a pillar and cost. And we have some drugs are $10,000 a month and some are 2 cents a pill, but you want to get the right outcome and you want to use the $10,000 a month pill or set of pills when you need to. But if you don't, you want to use the other ones, right? So you've got this pillar of efficiency and then just location. How do you make sure the right drugs are in the right place? So you have these different pillars of key medication aspects that are run by these different AI cohorts of data and systems. And that way you can constantly create either new, right now, of course, in the last few years, there's been a lot of sensitivity to the amount of opioids given to individuals and how much has been given and how much is enough. Well, you can have an opioid engine that's always evaluating are we crossing the line to too much? Does this make sense? Did this person go get meds at 3 different pharmacies and get the same script? You can always be evaluating those things such that you can be compliant and make sure you're helping people out. So there's a lot of aspects to medication, and AI can help us focus on these very succinctly. And when you describe that to pharmacists, I don't know if you have a lot of pharmacist friends, but they're very conservative, right? I wouldn't say worried, but they're very concerned that medications are used properly and things are done correctly. And so when you're talking to these chief pharmacy officers of these big institutions, being able to describe how you're going to be sort of the checks and balances gives them great relief because they can't control everything, but if they can get visibility to everything, they know when there's a problem, where to go to and solve it. So those are kind of the broad-based cases of how we're thinking about using AI. And I would also throw quantum computing into that. Now, I think from what I can tell, maybe you know better than I do, RJ, but I think it's 5 years out before it's sort of ubiquitous everywhere. But I know there's some early things out there. And what we're really thinking about, of course, in quantum computing is security, right? We've got to rewrite our security applications, come up with new ways of approaching that because quantum computing can easily break today's security types of devices and tools that we use. So anyway, that's what we're thinking about.
Curious how Omnicell may play into these other pharmacy tech solutions, the kind of straight to direct to consumer, if it's an Amazon or a capsule, some of these other technologies that are really facilitating that pharmacy experience for the end customer. How does Omnicell fit into that?
Well, one of the things that we always think about is Amazon or capsule is, well, these are the meds I'm taking at home. But generally, you go in and have some process, some surgery, or you're going to have some procedure. You're going to have something else that involves other meds that aren't coming through Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do those get added into the formula so that when, for instance, there's a real big difference between inpatient and outpatient. So when you're in a hospital, they may not even have the same name, the med that you have. They have a different brand that does the same thing. And so when you're passing through inpatient to outpatient or from even different states sometimes, these meds get really complicated because their names are all different, their doses are sometimes different, and it's just an opportune time for errors to occur. And so you want this holistic, longitudinal view of your medications. And today, it's really episodic. And Amazon is good at delivering your meds that you're on, but it's going to change. And it can change based on what venue of healthcare you're in. And that's really important. And that's the part people don't see. Most of the time, most of the errors come when you have one of those episodes. So when you're coming out of the hospital, they'll say, okay, now we want you to be on these meds, and they give you the list. One of them or two of them are the same meds you're on, but they're different names. And you go home and you start double taking, and you don't realize that you're double taking the meds. It's something they call med reconciliation that has to be done every time you leave on it, but it's hard to make it right. And so that's a good example of where we need to intersect with Capsule and Amazon to make sure everything's done right.
Excellent. Last two questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who's had a profound influence on you?
Oh, well, that's easy. That would be my father. My father was a VP of engineering, a very creative person of a large top 50 corporation. And he was a very calm person, very well respected, but he had the ability, you never would have thought he was this high up person in the corporation, but he had this ability to take very creative ideas and pass them along to engineering people who were able to execute very complex things in the mining world, and patented many things and had done many things, but you can't do those things by yourself. You have to have engineering teams and outside companies actually execute those things. And he always cared about people. He always was never rude or loud. He's probably a better leader than I am, so I still look up to him. He's 95, still writing papers on chemistry and the like. And I hope that I can say I ascribe to be as good as him someday.
Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
Wow, there's so many, but one is the American Nurse Association, and it's really about nurses. And I joined this foundation because I really had thought I understood nurses because they're the biggest users of our systems. You know, the average nurse from the time they get their degree until they retire or leave the industry is 13 years. We are burning out these people. The environment in which they work in is just so stressful, so demanding, and they're not really executing what they want to do, which is take care of people, help them get healed. They're doing a bunch of administrative stuff and difficult stuff that nurses just say, hey, I've had enough. So how can we recreate the environment for nurses to be something they really love to do? Let's solve some problems for them so they don't have to, one thing like worry about, are the meds going to be the right place? Am I having to call pharmacy to run up meds because they forgot to send them up? Those things all matter when you're trying to do your job. And the thing that's fascinating about a nurse, probably even more than doctors, they become empathetic and sympathetic with the patient. So when they don't have the meds to give to the patient on time, they take that stress and burden on. And it's like, even if it's not their fault, it's like, I've got to go do this. And so the burden of our healthcare system has created a difficult environment for people sometimes to work in. And so we need to solve that. And I want to help solve that. And so just think the next time you're someplace, thank a nurse. And remember, they're pretty much the only people doing the palliative care, the touching. And you can't get healed. You can't get well if you don't get touched in the process. I don't think.
That's a wonderful note to end on, Randall. I want to thank you again for taking the time. It's been a great conversation.
RJ, great questions. Love being here. I hope I can come back someday and give you an update. Love the show.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Cheers.